Welcome back to another episode of The Flow. I'm still hanging out sort of alone. Gordon is my co-host for today. Doc is still traveling and we'll be back again next week, but we've been covering all of the best topics while he's been gone. So welcome, Gordon, to the show. We're so excited that you are here today. Thanks for making the time.
Well, hi, Katie. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm really excited for this episode. I'm taking you kind of back a little bit into your past because I know you don't do this side of things as often now as you used to, but I've titled this episode The Legal Side of Podcasting, and I have a bunch of questions to pick your brain about do's and don'ts in the world of podcasting as it comes to like what are the rules? What are you allowed to do and what are you not allowed to do and what are we all missing? So, but before we jump in, can you give us a little bit of background on who you are and your shift from the world of law into the world of podcasting? Because it's kind of a cool story.
Well, the name is Gordon Firemark, and they call me the podcast lawyer. And so it's less of a shift away from law as just a migration of my sort of focus. I've been pointing my nose in the direction of podcasting since, gosh, the mid 2000s, 2006, I think. I was watching Leo Laporte do his thing with Twit when he started up after Tech TV, and then was fortunate enough to be invited to be a guest on a show that turned into a regular recurring thing, and that's how I got the podcasting bug and launched my own first show in 2009, and that's still going strong. We do a monthly legal news roundup. We just recorded 169th episode. So
wow,
that's a lot of months under our belt.
That is definitely a lot of months under your belt.
Yeah. But, when I got started in podcasting, I, being an entertainment and media lawyer going into it, I was looking for the right, what are the rules? What are the boundaries? And knowing how to do entertainment law and what filmmakers and television producers and music producers have to deal with. I sort of knew the ropes, but I wanted to make sure I was on the right track for podcast specific digital media stuff. And I found that there were no such resources. So
there really are. It's super hard to find anything.
Well, I sat down and I started putting together notes and memos, and that turned into a book that I wrote called The Podcast Blog and New Media Producers Legal Survival Guide. It's getting a little long in the tooth, due for an update, but it's been around for a while. And when you wite a book, that's how you become an expert in the eyes of the public. And frankly, that's how you learn the things that you need to become an expert. So here I am. And, all this time, I really have come at it as a way of serving the media creator community by providing as much knowledge and information as possible so they can do the things they need to do to bring a professionalism to the work that they're doing and protect themselves and respect the rights of others as well. So that's sort of my mission in life.
Absolutely. Well, it's so incredibly needed because I feel like when you step into the podcasting space as you did all those years ago, there really doesn't feel like there is much you need to think about, but then there are all these kind of hidden things underneath as you start going. I mean, the first off the bat is obviously any kind of like music that you're using for your, your intros and your outros, or even, content that you're sharing. We talk about that a lot at Ecamm, like make sure that you're using copyright protected, not copyright protected, copyright free music to be able to make sure you don't get any strikes against you. But other than music, what are sort of the main, say, like 3 to 5, or like the foundational things that podcasters should be thinking about that maybe they're not?
Well, a lot of it varies depending on the kind of podcasting you're doing, genre to genre. If you're doing a music heavy show, then you've got all those music issues that you were referring to. Copyright law is sort of the foundational stuff that we think about in entertainment and media law. And it doesn't apply just to audio. It doesn't apply just to music. Even within audio, that sound effects can be copyrighted. The painting or the poster that you have in the background of your shot, if you're doing video, could be a copyrighted image that needs some clearance and things. So that alone is a lot to think about. But then we get into, true crime, where we're talking about and perhaps accusing somebody of being the perpetrator of a crime. If you get that wrong, and it's false and it hurts their
Right.
reputation, you get into
Yeah.
libel. Defamation is the umbrella for libel and slander, and libel is what we
Wow.
get in this context. So, sort of knowing those rules and understanding those boundaries. There are privacy rules that come into play as well about not revealing stuff about a person that is inherently private information unless it's really a matter of public interest. And what medicine I take for my hair loss is probably not a matter of public. Well, maybe for me it is, but you know, um, uh, people's health conditions, their job reviews and educational history, those kinds of things can be really very private information. So we have to respect that. And in the course of doing journalism, sometimes you do want to reveal that stuff. So you sort of have to understand the boundaries and be able to make the case for it. So that's really, the key to all of this is what I was saying earlier: professionalism, being as professional in your approach to things as possible. And that means thinking like a professional, planning like a professional, and, acting like a professional, doing the things that pros do. A lot of what I do with podcast creators and media creators in general is sort of help them structure their businesses so that they are protected and insulated from those liabilities and risks that can come up. So oftentimes we're starting at the very beginning with, should you form a limited liability company, an LLC, for
Mm.
your venture? If it's a standalone separate business from something else that you do, then you want to keep those things separate keep the risk separate, I should say. And then obviously, when you're working with a team, you've got contracts to think about. If you
Hmm.
have an editor or a researcher who does work for you on your show, that person is bringing their creative talents to the effort, and they might end up owning their work or part of the whole work, and so on, if we're not careful. So that ownership question becomes an issue, and also management and control. Who's in charge of this thing? So
Yeah. Oh my gosh, my
um,
mind is swirling. Yeah, I know. I know a lot of podcasters have, and we don't have this yet, actually. So I'm super guilty of this. So if you're sitting in the chat, you're not alone. we need to implement a lot of this, but I have certainly been on a number of shows, and I've heard people talking about the idea of having some kind of language within your guest registration or your guest sign up process. If you're a podcast like this one that brings guests on, what
mhm,
is what is, I guess, best practice for making sure that you're covering yourself, as you were just saying, to be able to
yeah,
market and repurpose and use the content that guest shared as part of your podcast. If but I guess no matter what kind of podcast you have,
yeah,
is there a best practice there?
yeah. I mean, look, the best practice is always, always, always use a release agreement with your guests, and that release
Mhm.
agreement would be essentially the guest giving their consent to be recorded. Again, there's
Mhm.
that privacy stuff, right? If you don't consent to being recorded, yes, we know we're being recorded, but the consent in writing and irrevocable and those kinds of things, there's a lot of, nitty gritty language that we have to get in there. So
Yeah.
the consent to be recorded, the consent to have the recording used in the ways that you intend. And also, I try to plan for the future, because we don't always know that we're going to take excerpts
Mm.
from our podcast interviews and use them in writing a book, or it's going to be the
Oh, that's a good
springboard
point.
for a feature film script that we write, or something like that.
Yeah.
So you want that all rights language to be in there. Um,
Yeah.
the fact that they're not being compensated separately with money for
Mm.
the appearance, if that's the case. What you can and can't do with the recording. Can you use it in advertising? Can you use it for promotions? Um, and lately, with AI coming into the equation,
Mm.
I actually just recently revised the standard podcast release form that I offer up to the world for free. I revised it to add in a clause that says the guest consents to the use of AI in editing of the podcast,
Oh,
so long
interesting. Yeah.
as we aren't changing the meaning or tone of the interview overall.
Oh,
So we can't
interesting.
put
Yeah.
words in somebody's mouth, because that
Yeah.
technology is here now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, I guess you could use some fancy editing tools to make it sound like I think that the
Yeah,
moon is
we
made of green
certainly can.
cheese and all kinds of
Us,
things.
we're definitely going to do that later. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, now that I said that, the outtake will be there.
It is interesting though, because there's a lot of certainly, there's a lot that can go into the editing process, but then there are people like us who
Mhm.
we record this show live. So right now we're live
Right.
streaming this recording out to YouTube, and people are
Mhm.
contributing in from the comments and hanging out with us. So there probably is something extra that we would need to add into that, to that language and that agreement upfront with our guests that says we can't, like, we could make edits certainly to the final like video that we release later and the audio that goes out through the podcast players, but
Yeah.
if there are outtakes, as Gordon was just joking about earlier, there's not a lot we could do for the live recording other than take it down afterwards. But obviously we can't take back what was said or done while live here on YouTube. So
It's very hard to unring the bell.
yeah, you can't unring the bell. So that part probably is also good to be really clear about. What do you do if you're in our position where we definitely have some written language,
Mhm.
but not certainly not to the extent of what you were just saying, and certainly not what we need. Is it is it possible, is it something where you just want to apply those changes going forward, or is it something that we should go back and let former guests that were on the show before, send them an agreement across, or give them something in writing that says, we're going to continue to repurpose and use this content unless you tell us otherwise?
Yeah, great question. I generally don't recommend opening up the can of worms by going
Let a
back
lie.
to
Yeah.
to past guests and so on. And, this is the kind of thing where look, we improve our systems and our processes going forward, and we do it, and keep it simple. Of course, if you were then going to go back and use that content from one of your guests for something that was sort of outside what's normally expected,
Yeah.
if it turned into a feature film or you were going to use their clip in a major movie or something,
Sure.
then you go back and ask for the permission for that specific use. But,
Yeah.
I don't know that it's worth the time and energy and trouble to go back to every past guest, especially if you've been doing it a while. That could be a lot of people
Yeah.
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 So, get the release form and start using it going forward. I recommend just building it into the calendar scheduling part of
Yeah.
the process
Yep.
and having them check a box and say, yes, I agree to these terms and I'd love to be
Yeah.
on your show.
Yeah. There's a great question coming in from the law library. I love this. Who says that you, Gordon, have form templates available on your site. Are the templates state specific?
Most of them are not. And the good news here is while lawyers are licensed on a state to state basis and the law does vary a little bit in
Mm-hmm.
some places and others. For example, there's something called the right of publicity, which is the right of a person to control commercial uses of their name and image and likeness. That right as a property right exists only in about half of the US states and a
Oh,
handful of
interesting.
countries around the world.
Okay.
The right of privacy is much more widely accepted. It's pretty
Sure.
universal in the US, and many of the rules very, echo each other. But
Yeah.
privacy isn't a property right, it's something else. And so it's treated a little different. Anyway, the point being, we try to get the consent either way so that in a contract, and contract law is very universal,
Mm.
we have the rights we need in order to do it. So there's the call for the release and the other kind of contracts. You
Yeah.
can do in contracts what the default law of different states generally doesn't do. Copyright law also is a federal and to a certain extent international legal structure, and so
Yeah.
it doesn't change from state to state. So most of the
Yeah.
contracts
That
that we're
is.
go ahead.
Yeah. I was just gonna say it is an interesting. I'm thinking even about I do another podcast for fun with my best friend, but she's in Canada, and obviously we
Mhm.
like everyone watching who has a podcast or a show, the content itself is international, right? You're putting it out, it's
Yeah,
available technically globally. So yeah, that is interesting to think through, like the varying levels where there's some
yeah,
things that are state by state, there's some things that are federal, but then certainly the content that you're creating really
yeah.
does these days have an international reach, so you have to be thinking through what the implications are there as well.
Yeah. So most of the forms and templates that I've created are aimed at the American audience, and should handle things pretty well across all the state lines, and even with Canada. The one area that is sort of interesting is that in most countries, copyright law doesn't sort of distinguish this idea of a work made for hire that belongs to the employer and the independent contractor owning their own work, in the same way that we do. So some of the contracts will specify that language about work made for hire and reference American law. And I've had few folks in other countries just say, "Is it okay if I just delete that sentence?" And that works out fine. So,
That's
um,
good to know. Well,
yeah,
I have a personal benefit question, but hopefully it
happy to
also
help.
helps the rest of the audience as well. So I on my personal podcast, we're a movie review podcast we review old movies, so movies from like the
Yeah.
80s and 90s. And we've struggled finding information as it pertains to fair use. So like, are we able to do things like, have a reaction in our podcast to a trailer from a movie that was released in the 80s or 90s if the trailer is, publicly available, it was used for marketing, things like that. I feel like get a little bit difficult to find information on, and I'm sure other people have, things where they're reacting to video content. If the video is like out there and available and you're referencing it, and you're not using that content or claiming that content to be your own, what are the rules around that?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, and fair use really is the mystery area. There is
So
no
hard.
definitive answer to whether a
Okay.
particular use is fair use until a judge or a jury decides, and so that's one
Sure.
of the tricks to it. And this is one of those areas that is uniquely an American principle, fair use.
Mm,
Some
okay.
other countries have similar called fair dealing, and it's fundamentally the same. But
Okay.
um, what fair use is the way that the judges in the early part of the 20th century and then the Congress brought into the newer Copyright Act at the end of the 20th century, um, address the conflict between a constitutional provision that says that Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech, the First Amendment, with a law that says you can't copy that thing into your own work and make it part of your speech, right? So there's that inherent conflict. So the
Mm,
judges developed this fairly complicated 4-part balancing test that you have to go through for each individual piece of material that is used if you're claiming fair use. And that we look at the nature and character of the allegedly infringing work and the purpose of the original, and how is it transforming the meaning and purpose of the original work, how much in both quantity and quality, amount and substance of what's taken. And the fourth factor is the impact on the market or value of the
mm,
original. So a lot of people mistranslate that into, well, I'm not making money from it, so it's okay. That's not what it means. Or I only took 10 seconds. But if it's the fundamental heart of the work, 10 seconds, that's different, right?
it
So that's
matters.
why
Yeah.
so that's why we have to do that analysis on a case by case basis. And that's why when you ask lawyers, the answer will always be, well, it depends. Which is, I know, so
Thanks a lot,
satisfying.
lawyers. Yeah.
um, and
Oh,
the bottom line is that it can be risky to rely on fair use in
yeah.
these scenarios. Now, some things we can say with some degree of certainty. Look, if you're doing a movie review show and you need to show a clip of the movie that you're going to react to in order to explain why you feel this way about the film, that's probably okay. If it's a
Mhm.
short clip, 30 seconds from a 3 hour, 2 hour movie is one thing. 30 seconds from a 60-second video is a different story, right? That's the
Mhm.
amount and substance portion.
Yeah.
Um, so movie reviews, music reviews, sometimes we see that, but the danger is that somehow the material becomes almost a substitute listening or viewing experience for the
Okay.
audience, and
Interesting.
that's where you're just not transforming it enough to be considered fair use.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's worth considering too. Is I know many of you that are listening or watching are, doing, you know, demos
The
or,
reaction
or
videos.
reaction videos or things
Mhm.
like that, on either a podcast or a show. So it's certainly worth considering and taking into account. Ecamm makes it really easy to do things
Yeah.
like I know we do this for our show where you can use the widget overlay tool to be able to literally just drop a YouTube link in, and it'll
Mhm.
allow you to really easily and seamlessly play a video from YouTube. And again, that's the challenge of like, I struggle with this all the time. We're like, we want to roll the trailer, and again, it's a trailer, it's a marketing
Yeah.
piece, and it's so easy to do. But yeah, worth giving that thought about. I appreciate that. That's a great answer.
I should also just say, since I mentioned reaction videos, this, what we're talking about is where, I don't know, a YouTuber will be playing most of an episode of, I don't know, Shark Tank. A friend of mine does the Shark Tank one. And,
I love it.
he's there in a bubble on the screen talking
Yeah.
over the stuff from time to time and reacting to it. And he gets a lot of comments, hey, get out of the way and just let me watch the show, things like that.
I'm just here for the show. I don't want the reaction part. Yeah.
And so, but that the reactions are what transforms it. And so,
Yeah.
I don't think there's been a case where anybody has proven one way or another whether it's actually fair use to do that. But YouTube, being the owner of the playground, essentially, they have mostly allowed those reaction videos under the theory that it probably is fair use. So just full disclosure.
Yeah, I did. So I have played with, I don't do this consistently every episode, but I've played with, um, what we will do occasionally on our show is we'll start the episode by rolling the trailer and then talk, in depth about the movie itself. And I've only, in the maybe 5 times that we've done this across a year and a half of episodes, we've only ever gotten one, I don't even think it was a strike. It was like some lighter version from YouTube for the Dirty Dancing trailer, because it played the song,
the
and
song,
I didn't
right,
even think about it. And so we actually were in trouble for the song that played and not the actual trailer itself. So it is, it's worth thinking about. There's some great questions coming in. So let us ask. So again, from the Law Library, I love it. Are not the vast majority of podcasts at a basic level produced for commercial gain? How would this factor play out in a fair use balancing test? That's a great question.
Well, again, that's not the real question. Is it a commercial? Well, that factor comes in the first factor. What's the purpose and character of the allegedly infringing use? I will say that people mistake commercial gain for commercial purpose. If you are using the thing that you're taking and selling it directly, like offering tickets or behind a paywall or something, that's going to be a commercial use. But the fact that you post your video on YouTube or that you publish your podcast and you have sponsors doesn't automatically make the content of the show commercial in nature. You can still be commenting and reacting. And, look, you can have a documentary film that runs on television with commercials in between. It's still a documentary film. It's not a commercial, right?
It's not a commercial. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we talk about the commercial use, we're really thinking of sort of in connection with a transaction or an offer of selling something or something like that. So the fact that it's ad supported doesn't make it inherently commercial in that regard. That said, if all you're doing is bringing stuff in, so, just filling the space between the ads, maybe it is something commercial. Again, it's one of these it depends scenarios, but I don't think that typically podcasts are viewed as inherently commercial works.
That is a good clarification, though, because you are right in that the majority of podcasts are trying to monetize, right? They're trying to be a business themselves, or be someone's full-time job. They're trying to make money from them. But that is a good clarifying point. We have Tatiana hanging out with us in the live chat. As a reminder, this podcast is recorded live on YouTube, so you can always hang out with us in the live chat and ask your questions. Tatiana asks, if you were to teach college students about top 5 common legal issues that they should watch out for early in their careers, what would you share?
Well, I think we've sort of talked about some of them. Watch out for other people's stuff. Make sure you're getting permission. Get it in writing.
Yep.
Reading and understanding the contracts that you're signing is important, I would say.
Oh, huge. I've made some mistakes there in my career for sure.
Yeah. And a lot of folks coming out of school are really signing up for employment for the first time, and they may not have a lot of bargaining power, but they should still understand the contracts that they're signing. And that even if there isn't actually a formal employment contract, understanding the sort of scope of things. confidentiality, non-disclosure agreements have become a pretty common thing for young people doing internships and things like that. So understand the boundaries of that and
Mm.
respecting that, because I've seen that come back to bite my students when they've uh, gone and done an internship and then posted something on social media and immediately gotten in trouble with the boss and things like that. Five, boy, what else?
Was that
Be,
3?
yeah, beware of the word partnership. It's a word we throw
Oh.
around a lot, but it has legal meaning. It means that you are co-owners, co-creators, co-everything, and sharing liability also. So be a little more cautious about throwing that term around. Having a
Mhm.
partner means really owning and being owned at the same time. So
Owning and being owned. I love that. That's the best.
um, any kind of collaborative relationship, will have those kind of things. So I encourage people to have those conversations and be clear about the intentions and understandings, and most of the time to document that in writing as well. In the podcasting world, I call it a podcast prenup. If you're working with co-hosts or co-producers or something like that, make sure you have some clarity on who owns this thing and who's responsible for what and who gets what money if there's money coming in. So
That's actually a really, really good point. That's another thing we don't have. Luis, cover your ears behind the scenes. It's another thing that we don't have that we should work out. We talk all the time about, our workflow and our process and who does what. That's kind of the foundation of the show, is like how to podcast, but
yeah.
we don't have that sort of clearly listed
you
out
know
kind of in that contract viewpoint. So that's a good one
Yeah,
to consider.
just an example, from television, when David Letterman switched from NBC to CBS, I
Uh,
think it was, there was
yep.
a whole thing about, look, he gets to use his name and he could come over and do the show on the new network, but they couldn't call it the same title, which I think was Late Night with David
Yep.
Letterman. And he wasn't allowed to take some of the classic bits that had become repeated on
Sure.
the show, things like
Part
the
of the
guy
show.
under the
Yeah.
stairs and the Velcro suit
Yep.
and things like that, because that intellectual property belonged to NBC. And so again,
Oh.
having had those discussions and putting it in writing is how you sort of protect ownership of those, your personal brand,
Yep.
your logos and likenesses and those kinds of things are important to get out ahead of, and that's what we lawyers are here for. So
Yeah. Yeah, these are all like really good things to be thinking through. We're gonna have to update our checklist. We don't have any of these legal points in our in our getting started checklist. We'll have to add those in, because it is interesting. Like we do this show obviously for Ecamm, and both Doc and I are employees of Ecamm.
mhm.
Um, and so, I mean, not that we have any intention of leaving our jobs and continuing this show on without Ecamm, but that is something to that certainly we could and should have in writing, that like the show was created solely to to help teach people how to do podcasting better,
Yeah.
as a marketing vehicle for Ecamm as a company. So it is worth thinking about, like, as you're starting a podcast, is it a podcast that is a marketing tool for your business? How does it connect with what kind of business? As you said, does it
Mhm.
need to be its own business? Does your podcast
Right.
need to be an LLC? Who are the people that are working on it? These are all things to consider that I think a lot of us, because we're creative people, don't. We're like, yay, a podcast. Let's get started. And we're thinking about like title and colors and, where it's going to go across all these different platforms.
Yeah.
Um,
Katie, I just want to clarify something. I'm seeing in the chat that Awesome Fun Things
sure.
has somewhat mischaracterized what I was saying about fair
Ah,
use. And I just want to
Matt,
be
come on.
really clear.
So Matt,
And I think
for
there might
people
have
who are
been a tongue
listening,
planted in the cheek there, but that doesn't always read
yeah,
so well.
Matt
So,
is a little sarcastic. So go ahead.
yeah. So fair use allows you to use someone else's modified work for profit under certain circumstances, and it doesn't mean any use, even commercial, is automatically fair use. So just let's be
Got
really
it.
clear. It's this complicated test, and so I don't want anybody to read that and just start going off and getting themselves into trouble. So
Yeah, everyone here, to make sure we don't get Gordon in trouble or Matt in trouble. We don't want anyone to be in trouble. Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, I want to talk a little bit, because particularly here on the Flow, and I think more and more people are starting to get into it, sort of a similar format. We, as a podcast, are blending a lot of different content mediums together. So it used to be, podcast was something that was, predominantly, well, I guess started in video, as Doc will say, moved into the
Mhm.
audio space, now is kind of in both the audio and video space. But certainly these days we have, YouTube is a big player, and then there's all the individual podcast players that are owned by very, very large companies.
Mhm.
Are there any things that you need to be thinking of in that space? I mean, I can think off the top of my head of, like, for example, we used an AI tool to create a theme song for a different show that I do. And I was thinking through, like, okay, like, did I make sure that I check those boxes that I can use that across all of these different places? Because it's not like I'm just using that on YouTube, or I'm just using that, on Apple, etc. Like, are there things to consider because of the number of companies that you are playing with as a podcast
Well,
creator?
that's an interesting question. I think that you have to know where you're originating your show. You mentioned if you were doing a show on Spotify
Mhm.
using their creation tools and their hosting tool,
Sure.
their terms of use are a little different than
Okay.
other platforms and so on. And you still own your stuff mostly. Again, unless they're paying you like they paid Joe Rogan for those years.
Yeah.
In that case, that was well, I don't know what the terms of that deal were exactly, but um,
Mistake. Yeah.
ownership.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure his hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank don't feel that much like a mistake.
Sure. Sure,
But
sure.
the point is, so you need to check and understand what you're getting into, and a lot of the platforms where you can publish a podcast let you do it for hosting for free.
Mhm.
And even YouTube, this is true. There's no such thing as a free lunch. You need to understand what they get out of it
Yeah.
and what you get, right? So
Yep.
the good news is most of the platforms have done a pretty good job of accommodating that. Yes, you still own your own content, but
Mhm.
it's the scope of what they're allowed to do with it. As one of the areas that I'm watching closely is some of the, I think Spotify has added to their terms of use that if you publish a podcast on Spotify, they have the right to use AI to train AI on that content.
Ooh,
Um,
interesting.
and and I may be speaking out of turn, so we've got to double check that. But
No, but that is definitely going to become more and more of a thing to watch
right,
for.
right.
Yeah.
And I think it's the kind of thing we as creators should be restricting, not allowing. Is don't use my
Mhm.
stuff for AI unless there's a separate transaction happening. Um, that's my sort of personal view on the subject. Interesting
Yeah.
things around AI in particular. So if you're using tools that involve AI, you may want to make certain disclosures to your guests, to your audience sometimes that things are AI generated. I think that's
Mhm.
going to become a more of a thing. I think we're going to see
I think we're going to be
legislation.
forced to do a lot more of that.
Yeah,
You're starting to see that even across the social platforms. Like, they are now helping to identify, like,
right.
hey, looks like this may have been created with AI. Let's flag that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think we as consumers have a right to know whether what we're
Yeah.
seeing is real or fake, and whether
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's been sponsored content. Those are the other disclosures and things that we are getting
Yeah.
used to with respect to false advertising and those kinds of things. AI,
Yeah.
it makes sense. The other side of AI, you said you created a song using AI
Mhm.
tools.
Sure did.
You may not really own that song. Somebody else gets
Yeah.
that same song. They could probably just use it and there would
Yeah.
be no. So using it
Yeah.
for brand centric stuff may not be the
Yeah.
best approach. The reason being that copyright law doesn't allow machines to own copyrights, and only an
Mm.
author is the owner of a copyright. So if it
Okay.
wasn't human authored, it
Yeah.
doesn't have a copyright.
That's interesting, because so the difference between this show and then my other show. So this show, we use a tool called Epidemic Sound, and that
Yeah,
is the music for this show. And as you said, we've heard it in other shows, and we're always like, "Oh, it's our theme song,"
sure.
out in other shows, and that's fine for us. And it allows us to make sure we don't get any kind of strikes or any
Yeah.
copyright issues. And we pay monthly for that as a tool
Yeah.
in the service. The other show, we used a tool called Suno, Suno. And what it does is it actually, you give it information about your show, about you,
Mhm.
whatever, inputs you want to give it. And it uses AI to write lyrics for your
Oh.
theme song. And then you can choose what kind of music you want that set to. So it
Mhm.
actually like says our names and says that we're like a movie review show and like that we're reviewing movies from the past and is set in like 80s music. So
Okay.
it's really fun and it's very specific to us, but it is interesting as you said, it was entirely written by robots. So it's
Yeah.
so it's
Well, so
probably,
yeah, and more importantly, you wouldn't be able to claim it on a YouTube
yeah,
monetization scheme or something like that.
no,
So
yeah,
that's
yeah,
uh, probably not a big issue for most creators, but
yeah.
it also depends what you're doing. If you're using an editing tool that is doing a major, I'm thinking of the what's it called, Opus, right?
Opus, yeah.
Opus Clip is an AI generated video
Mhm.
edited down from what you've uploaded to YouTube or
Yep,
wherever.
yep.
There are questions about whether if somebody else wanted to take my Opus Clip video and embed it in their website for some reason, would
Oh,
I
good
have any
point.
recourse?
Yeah.
Something like that. I don't know.
Oh, that's interesting.
I created the original footage, so theoretically I own that. But again, if
Yeah,
they're
and then a
taking
lot of those have
tiny
guests
snippets,
in them too. Yeah,
yeah,
that brings you back to like your guest question. Oh, interesting.
exactly.
You've got my
Exactly.
mind spinning today. All right, Tatiana has another great question. She says, "Can you share best practices if we are considering having a co-host for our YouTube channel, where one person owns the channel but has a regular co-host for the show?" That's a great question. That is certainly the case for both the shows I do as well. So
Yeah. Get a good co-host agreement, what I refer to as a podcast prenup. And
prenup.
thank you for the softball. I'll just say you can come on over to my website at uh, podcastlawforms.com. And I have,
Podcastlawforms.com. I'm swinging over there after.
yeah, and I have a co-host agreement on there that does exactly what you're talking about. I own the show. You're my co-host. Here's the nature of our relationship.
Yeah.
And there's another one called a co-production agreement where the intent is really to be equals.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
that's the approach. Have the conversation, figure it out. I also have um, a podcast prenup sort of planning guide, a checklist that you can go through
Oh,
if you
love
want
a
that.
checklist.
Podcastprenup.com. That's free. You can give me your email address and you'll get that. So
You got it. You
sorry,
can have my
I'm
email
pitching my
address
stuff
every
too
day.
much.
No, 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 not at all. No, this is really super helpful. As I said, it's one of those things that I feel like more that I was podcasting, the more these questions were surfacing. And then you
Mhm.
and I were at an event together and you messaged and I was like, oh, we need to talk about these things because I'm sure if I'm having these questions, everyone else is having these questions as
Yeah.
well. Or it's things that maybe it like was somewhat of a question in the back of your mind, but you assume you're doing it right, or, it doesn't feel like that big of a deal until it becomes a big deal, until, something happens and you have a
Mhm.
fight with your co-host, or you decide that you want to launch, a fourth wall shop and you want to start selling merch and and then all of a sudden there's questions on who gets what cut and split. And if the show is promoting the merch, how does all that work? So
Exactly. I
all
mean,
things.
these are all the kinds of conversations that we need to have. What I like to say about this is that if you're doing everything right from a legal and business standpoint, nothing happens. You don't notice. It's only when you haven't checked the boxes or crossed the T's and dotted the I's that when something goes wrong, it becomes a catastrophe. So
Yeah.
that's my argument for using lawyers and using legal stuff and doing your thing. So
Yeah. I know, you're right. If everything is going well, then you'll never have to work with lawyers or very, very rarely. It's a situation where we like to have friends that are lawyers, but we don't want to work with lawyers in any kind of way.
right.
You don't want anything to be going wrong. So yeah. Oh, I really appreciate it. I cannot believe that we're nearing the hour. So let's think through if there's anything else that we're missing. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that you get asked a lot that would be valuable sharing with the podcasting audience.
Yeah, I think we've covered the frequently asked questions.
Yeah.
Should I form an LLC? That's a big open. You need some analysis in there, but the reasons for doing that would be around the liability insulation, setting it up. Sometimes it becomes the podcast prenup. It's the structure of the relationships between the people involved, the owners. There are some tax benefits to running things through an LLC sometimes if
Absolutely.
you're making enough money to justify it. And there's a little bit of street cred that comes
Yep.
with it, having
You're
that
legit.
LLC after
Yeah.
your name, and
Yep.
frankly, it just imbues a kind of professional tone to
It
everything that
does.
happens.
Yep.
Trademarks.
Oh, yeah.
Titles of podcasts, if they are distinctive, can be a trademark. A trademark
That is a really good point.
yeah. A trademark is a brand, a distinctive symbol or word or phrase that is used that identifies the goods or services that it's affixed to as to their source. So
Mhm.
when you watch the flow, we know it's coming from Ecamm and Katie and Doc.
Mhm.
That is a brand, and we ought to take care to choose distinctive titles if we can,
Mhm.
and protect them by registering the trademarks where that makes sense. Financially, it does have a cost. So,
Yeah.
and the process isn't overly complicated. It's a technical form that
Yeah.
some people do it themselves, and some of them come to me to fix it. but it is worth exploring, at least. Should you register a trademark for your podcast title, or your YouTube channel can be a title. The name of the channel could be a trademark as well. And I think that's a powerful kind of professionalism to bring to the table also.
Absolutely. And at what point does it move? I knew this at one point in my life, but the difference between a trademark and a registered trademark, registered mark, copyright.
Yeah, well,
What's the little R?
right.
What's the
Yeah,
name of the
so
little R?
trademark can be protected just under basic common law. It tends to be very territorial, really just
Sure.
regional wherever you're using it. Now, in podcasting and YouTube, that's pretty much national, international, but you're more likely to encounter confusion in the marketplace if you don't register. The registered trademark takes us out of that sort of state by state or regional level of
Got it.
protection and gets us the more broad federal protection. And
The
then
level up. Yeah.
you can register in individual countries as well. And, at some point it becomes expensive and ridiculous, but
Sure.
certainly in your home country and where you have big audience, I think it makes sense. So you don't end up with another show that has a very similar title and causes confusion and dilution. And if they make a crap show and you make a good one and someone tunes in and hears it and thinks it's your show's crap, that's not so good. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Do you
So the R in a circle indicates a registered trademark, and
registered trademark? Okay.
you'll see TM sometimes
Mhm.
as an indicator of common law trademark.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for the clarification.
Mm-hmm.
So from the law library wants to know if you do consultations and if you have a rate.
I do consultations. I offer free consultations to folks who reach out to me, assuming it makes sense from the initial
Sure.
email, whatever. But yeah, you can visit my website at firemark.com and follow the link and visit, or just reach out to me and contact me through socials or whatever, and I'll give you information. I don't want to publish the link for the free consultations on here, but
Share it with everyone. Yeah.
yeah,
Reach
but
out.
find me
Reach out.
on whatever social media. G Firemark is how you find me on most socials, and we can make that happen. And
Great.
yeah, I love to do consultations.
Yeah. Oh, I super appreciate it. All right. Last question, and then we'll wrap it up here. Tatiana asks, thoughts on selling digital tools? She'd like to begin selling slide decks, activities, etc. There are legal considerations around this. If you're using your podcast or your show and you're including information about options to buy things.
If the stuff that you are selling is original to you, or that you have acquired the right to sell, there are very few big important concerns. I mean, obviously you may want to use the LLC structure to protect
Sure.
yourself and your personal stuff there. Truth in advertising is of course important. And slide decks activity. Yeah, there shouldn't be a lot to worry about there. If you're putting out information that people could rely on to their harm or detriment, you may want to think about some disclaimers and disclosures, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I think it's not rocket science.
Just make
Unless you're
sure you're
selling slide
checking the
decks about rocket
boxes.
science.
Yeah, I was going to say, unless you're selling slide decks about rocket science.
Astrophysics courses, right?
Oh my gosh. I am not. I am definitely not. That is not my field. Well, this has been so much fun, Gordon. So I know you said you didn't want to plug a bunch of stuff, but like one more time, we have these in the comments as well and in the description and show notes, regardless of where you're watching. But where can we find you?
Okay, well, GordonFiremark.com is sort of the hub for most of my courses and educational stuff. Firemark.com for the law firm side of my life. And Podcast Law Forms if you're looking for those legal forms. If you're looking for a guest release to have to use with your guests on the show, podcastrelease.com is a free guest release that I just recently updated for AI, and that is my main lead magnet thing that I like to invite podcasters to access. Podcastrelease.com. And if I may, I just want to tell you, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Pacific time, I'll be hosting a workshop called Podcast Growth and Profit, Mastering the Fundamentals and Avoiding Common Mistakes. And you can sign up for that by going to podcastlaw.net.
Podcastlaw.net. And that is July 10th. So if you're listening to this later, you missed it, but still follow back up with Gordon to see if you can get
I do
access to replay. Oh, good.
Yeah,
Good. There
I
you
do
go.
I do it every few weeks. So even if you're hearing this later and you're interested, head on over to podcastlaw.net and sign up for the next one.
Awesome. Yeah, I will definitely have to check that one out. I think that would be super helpful. Well, I really appreciate it. And thanks to Paul for dropping in all of those links into the chat and the description for us. I appreciate it. And Luis, let's roll on over into our credits. So you can find this show at any time at flow.ecamm.com. We are available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, TuneIn, and more. And this show, like all others, are hosted by Captivate. Our friends at Captivate make podcast hosting so insanely helpful and easy, and they are entirely focused on helping you to create a successful podcast that grows. And I can say this from experience. I have used both Captivate and I have used other ones that we will not name here. And it really is a big difference. You get what you pay for, and Captivate is affordable, but they really make a big impact in what you're able to do and all the different features that they offer. So worth checking them out. They are over at captivate.fm. Huge thank you to them for always being such a huge advocate for this show and many others. And thank you so much to Gordon for hanging out with us today. I'm like, my mind is reeling. I have to go sign up for all of the different forms so I can catch up. Sorry, future guests. We're now going to have to fill out some forms, but
my plan for world domination. Slowly.
Exactly. World domination is slowly working.
Thanks for having me.
I super appreciate it. I think this was really valuable information. I'm seeing lots of thank yous coming through the chat here as we're recording. So super appreciate it. And we'll be back again next week. Same bad time, same bad channel. So you can find us every Tuesday if you catch the live recording at 12 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, or you can listen. Episodes drop on Tuesdays wherever you get your podcasts or here on YouTube. Thanks, Gordon. And thanks Flow Riders. We'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.